Lack of nutrition has become a major problem for Canada. I'm Marco Perri. Welcome to the Perri platform. When was the last time that you thought about what you ingest? The Star put out a piece citing that a lack of nutritious food is harming Canadians. It seems logical. Less nutritious food being ingested means there is more bad food being eaten, and that means a reduction in overall well-being. Some of the findings in these articles are quite interesting though. For example, the Lancet was cited. They did a research report, and they found that 11 million people worldwide have died due to poor diet. Wow. How the pendulum has swung. There used to be a time when people were not dying due to poor diet. Instead, they were dying because there was no diet at all. There wasn't enough food for them to eat, and they were going through famines and they were impoverished. Now, it's odd. You have millions of people dying because they're just eating the wrong things. It's crazy. But that is the world we live in, and that is where the trends are heading. Starvation really is not a problem for most of Canada. There is still some subset of the population who has that constant fear, but there are outlets for them. For the general populace, though, it's become more a question of what exactly are you putting in your body. The article also states that the quality of food in Canada is, simply put, terrible. Canadian food contains nearly twice the level of salt when compared to identical international products. Well, it sounds like Canada likes salt. Also, probably true as well, our health and food agencies are not doing their job properly. They are allowing manufacturers to make their products more appealing at the downfall of the consumer. The only reason why companies are racking up the amount of salt content in their food is because salt tastes good. Salt makes food very delicious, and if you eat something like that, well, you're going to want more. So, as competitors try to compete against each other to produce the best product that consumers are going to want, if there is no party there to set a reasonable limit, we enter the salt race, and maybe not just salt. Any other ingredients that make the product better, but not necessarily better for you in terms of health, those are going to be input to the maximum. This is problematic because too much sodium in your diet can lead to increased risks of high blood pressure, heart disease, and stroke. If we established already that Canadian food contains double the amount of sodium when compared to international counterparts, what's that say about our health? Especially when it comes to the problems associated with high sodium intake, heart disease, strokes, and whatnot. In 2012, Stats Canada identified that nearly 2.5 million Canadians are living with a diagnosed ischemic heart disease. Ischemic refers to non-sufficient blood supply. It's pretty problematic. You can live with it for sure, but it is a complication. I don't think we've done too much to lower those numbers since 2012. Salt is definitely not the only problem here, but it is without a doubt a massive contributor. One of these suggested answers to this, based on the article, is more fiber intake. Studies show that fiber can fight against heart disease and strokes, two things that occur due to high sodium intake, so maybe that's the balancing act right there. Take in some more fiber. But here's the catch. Despite fiber being a wonderful tool to use to combat those complications, on average, Canadians only meet half of their daily fiber needs. There's another problem. We're taking in too much sodium and not enough fiber. Maybe that's because, I must admit, fiber sounds boring. I'm thinking about bran flake cereals and raisins and prunes, but although it sounds lackluster, it works. People have been anti-carb lately, and maybe that also complicates the issue because carbs are typically high in fibers, things like pastas, but with things like the keto diet becoming very trendy, people are cutting those out and they have to rely on alternative sources. Those sources can be maybe things like carrots and beans, but fiber is becoming a hard to find thing, as we note right there in the study. So far we've established two problems, the salt and the fiber. One more thing that comes to mind off the top of my head is sugar. Soda companies in particular, they're one of the leading causes of childhood obesity. Those drinks are jam-packed. If you look at the nutritional facts on the back of the cans, a small can can sometimes have upwards of 30 to 40 grams of sugar in it. Studies from organizations like the American Heart Association recommend that you only intake about 37.5 grams of sugar per day if you are a man, and if you're a woman, it's more akin to 25 grams. You can see it's problematic when a small can of pop already puts you at your limit. Anything else you eat after that is just gravy on top. Gravy that's going to lead to health problems. Brands like Coca-Cola know that full well, And they've actually been caught hiding studies that prove that, but that's a topic for another day. So, back to the issue here. Another factor that complicates the nutrition question is income. More than 1 in 10 Canadians are worried that they won't be able to afford the next meal or are going to be forced to skip one due to income restraints. The prevailing knowledge here is that cheap food like McDonald's is what that demographic will turn towards because, first of all, it's cheap, it's accessible, it's fast, it's easy, and it's tasty. The truth really is, though, that's not the correct answer. Cooking at home really is the cheapest alternative if that consumer is only concerned with cost. They can get a bag of rice, some frozen vegetables, some discount chicken or something. They can meal prep that, and they'll be good for weeks, and the amount that they pay per meal is far lower than anything they're getting at McDonald's. The real issue here is more so time and convenience, I would argue. If you are struggling to make ends meet, if you are worried about putting food on the table, I would assume that means you don't have an abundant amount of free time. Maybe you are bouncing from job to job, picking up kids from daycare, pulling overtime, or whatnot. In situations like that, it becomes clear why things like fast food become appealing. It's fast, somewhat affordable, and easy. If you are struggling like that, I don't imagine you have the amount of hours in your day to be able to put together those meals. That's a vicious cycle. Now you're losing on two fronts, financially and in terms of your health. It's plausible that you may end up developing complications via that diet that make it even harder for you to earn money. Maybe you get sick, you can't go into work, you end up losing that day's pay, you become bedridden, you have to go to the doctors for a note, you gotta take the transit system, an extra trip, or you need to pay for medicine that is not covered by your insurance plan. There's a lot of things that can go wrong via not taking care of yourself through your diet. The bottom line here is we need better, more affordable options that do not take an eternity to prepare. They have to be easy as well. There kind of seems to be a triangle of choices here in Canada. You can only pick two. So, it is cheap, it is healthy, and it's tasty. You can get your pick of the two, but you can't have all three. Maybe you go for cheap and tasty, you get McDonald's. Maybe you go for healthy and cheap and it doesn't taste good. Or you can go for healthy and taste good, but it's not going to be cheap. Getting all three is hard, but that brings me to my next point now, which is restaurants in Canada. It's a little bit of a tangent, but really, dining out is insane, and I'm sure that contributes to the problem, because restaurants are insane, so you're forced to rely on the fast food chains, which are a little bit more unhealthy on average. Think about it. If you go to a restaurant, not even a fancy one, you can get a bowl of pasta that costs the restaurant maybe $2 to put together, and you're being charged $20 for it. That's without tax and tip. In total, you might be spending $25 for a meal that's not even going to fill you up one time. And if you think about it from a value perspective, it's just not worth it. $25 can probably feed you for a couple days versus that one meal in a restaurant. It's hard to find good value when you're eating out. And it's funny to me because as I travel Asia, I become more aware of just how ludicrous things are in Canada. That trifecta I mentioned, you can get it in Asia. You can get cheap food that tastes good and it's healthy for you. You can get a bowl of ramen, a big one, for around $5. And that's in a place like Tokyo. If you try to find something like that in Canada, it's going to be far more expensive, double, triple, or maybe even quadruple. Then it comes to another thing that complicates the dining process, and that is tipping. It really is asinine. What it does fundamentally is it allows the restaurant to pass their cost of operation onto the consumer. Instead of paying their waiters a living wage, not even minimum wage, they pay them less and they expect you to pick up the tab via your tips. It's a great way for the companies to make more money and a bad way for the consumers to eat out at a more cost-effective rate. Another thing that Asia has right, in Japan, tipping is not a thing when you eat. The restaurant makes sure the staff is taken care of, and it makes the experience far more pleasant for everyone involved. But anyways, I digress. Now back to the article. It links these findings of malnutrition in Canada to medicine. We pour billions of dollars into treating people when they suffer from a condition. That is a reactive measure. How about a more proactive approach? I think that's a good idea. Some portion of these treatments that we perform could have been removed if the diets were in order from the beginning. Not all of them, obviously, but some conditions we can say would not have happened if that person had been treating their body properly via nutrition from the get-go. Some problems are a direct result of people's diet. If you run the math, it's probably a far cheaper alternative and one that's better for the health of the nation to do something like provide more accessible vegetarian options or things that are healthier for our populace versus number one, having to commit continual care to people who are struggling, or two, having to perform expensive operations like gastric bypass surgery, for example. Now, how can we go from where we are now to a better point in the future? I think one area to look at is starting young. School boards and trying to figure out nutritional diet plans for them. Maybe it'd be even easier to just buy food in bulk via these school boards and their connections and just create a lunch plan for everybody. And we have to ensure that, first of all, it is in fact nutritious. No pseudoscience with this. No saying we're going to give you some veggies on the side, but we're going to give you cake at the same time too. It should probably be something along the lines of a fruit snack or a vegetable type of option for the beginning of the day. You move on to your lunch, which is another vegetable-based diet, maybe a little bit of chicken here and there if you're able to eat that, and scratch the idea of dessert. People don't need that, and it's not really a thing. You can give them another apple or something along those lines, and I'm actually convinced that if the school board were to implement this, it could be a massive cost savings to households. And not only that, it can take the stress and the time out of having to put together a lunch and a snack for your child as you send them off. Your bargaining power as one shopper is nothing compared to that of a school who will be having to feed thousands of people. The parents can probably buy into that as a form of cheap meal plan for their kid, and it can also teach them the values of eating healthy things. It can get them into it. If they see that everyone's doing it, it could be a good place to start. Because as I mentioned before, convenience is a big factor in the equation. If your family is very busy, it can be hard for you in the household to create wholesome meals. You might be forced to give them the fast thing. Maybe that means warming up a pizza pop or going to McDonald's and giving that to your kid on a routine basis versus an alternative here that seems to be making sense. You buy things in bulk and you prepare them in the school, ensuring that it meets a nutritional guideline. Then, for people who are not in school, I think we should be looking for cheaper alternatives to everyday diet plans. Meal prep should be a thing that's more accessible to everybody. And it should be meal prep that's cheap as well. Right now there are options, but they're obscene. They cost far too much money, and people are straying away from them. I think maybe if people even start to do it themselves, find the motivation to get it done on one day of the week, you can put together a nice set of food that will last you for 7 days via that. Now the problem comes into play when you create that one dish and you start getting tired of it. I assume eating the same thing for 7 days is probably not the most appealing idea, and this is where I think there's an opportunity. Maybe you create a network of people within your community who trades dishes, so you create this massive bowl of pasta that can serve 7 portions. Maybe you trade one of that to your neighbor down the street who has a nice dish of rice, and then you trade another bowl to somebody who makes some good stir fry or some curry, and that could be a very interesting opportunity here to, first of all, get into the meal prepping idea with healthy alternatives, and number 2, try a bunch of different cuisines. That's only a rough idea as well. I'm sure companies, when given the time, will be able to adapt this and find a really creative way to introduce healthy eating. We just need to make it happen, we need to make it trendy, and we have to make it accessible to everybody. And the bottom line here is that fundamentally, Canadians have to take it a little bit more seriously. It's far too easy to disregard our health, and I think that's due in part to things like massive marketing campaigns from some of the biggest corporations who are trying to feed you junk. Everywhere you look, you might see ads for things like McDonald's or Harvey's or Burger King, and even if you don't see the ads, you might see the physical storefronts or you're getting mail coupons for those places as well, and it's all very tempting. I think we need to see a rise of healthier alternatives out there, and there are some, but you can probably count the amount of options of those on your fingers, and if you can't find one nearby to you, well, you're forced to either just start cooking it at home, which we've already established is time consuming, or going to one of those cheaper, less healthy places. We need more options and they have to be cheap as well, and it goes back to that triangle theory. Why can't we find something that is cheap, healthy, and tasty? These margins in the restaurants are insane. They can afford to bring things down a little bit, and we need a creative entrepreneur to bring that together for Canada. So that brings me to the end of today's conversation. If you enjoy the content, be sure to leave a review and share. That will help us grow. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at Perri Platform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.